Hello, this is Scribble. I'm coming to you from a game of Revolution Custom Magic. This is the second round of Grand Prix Teqien. I'm playing a Monowhite control list, and my opponent is Requiem, who is playing some form of aggro deck. Looks like a red and white tokens-based aggro deck. So I think I'm fairly favored in this matchup. My deck is pretty anti-aggro focused. So let's get into this one. Opponent on the play, which is obviously pretty nice for them, but I think we should be okay. Alright, this is a one land opening hand, which is not nice for me, so I'm going to put this back. Alright, this one is a little bit better. While Shengfa as a 6-drop is going to be pretty good at stabilizing the game if I'm able to get there, I have enough other tools in my deck that I'd rather draw that are also on the more expensive end that I think putting it back seems correct here. My top end is on the slightly expensive end, so I'd rather not put back a plains over Shengfa. I think keeping the single target removal is important here. Particularly Walk the Dead Path with my opponent having some nice enchantments that I would like to get rid of as well. Okay, the opponent starts out with an Emblazoned Hooligan, which is, for all intents and purposes in this matchup, just a 1-mana 1/1, so that's pretty nice. I don't think I need to hit that with removal. I think I can afford to wait for a better target. Drawing a 5th land might hurt me with my decision to put back Shengfa, but that's the way how this goes. Okay, opponent on no turn to play. There is my 6th land, so definitely punished here. So my opponent does run Anointed Escort as an instant speed way of putting 2 tokens onto the battlefield. Seems they don't have anything with flash or any other instant speed effects, so I believe that is what they're holding on to. No point deploying the Steadfast Gatekeepers at this point, so we'll just pass it back. Okay, no turn to play is nice to see for me. Okay, opponent has an Unburnt Maiden, so this is going to make a token when it enters the battlefield, so it does give them a little bit of value, but it is a prime target for Let Them Eat Cake on my next turn. Right, flooding out a little bit. Okay, opponent deploying an Ardor. So this is an Anthem and 2 bodies, but if my opponent does decide to attack with it, I can answer it with Walk the Dead's Path. Alright, so that works out fairly nicely for me. Only taking 3 here. That is the last of my action at the moment though, so I do need to draw pretty well to not fall really far behind at this point. And that is not what I wanted to see. Yeah, with these draws, I'm not sure if keeping Shengfa would have caused this to play out too differently. It's very possible that I just die before I even hit 6 mana if I don't draw something relevant in my next turn. Alright, opponent with another Ardor is probably going to seal this up. Bit embarrassing if the anti-aggro control deck folds this easily to aggro, but that's how we go. Opponent might choose not to attack with Ardor after they lost their other copy last turn to Walk the Dead's Path. I do have 4 of those, so it's not the worst choice that my opponent could make. The open mana bluff paying off. Okay, that's nice to see. Well, hilarious way for game 1 to go. Alright, I don't think we can go really any worse than that, so... Alright, Farland's Diplomat is pretty specifically for this matchup, taxing my opponent for going wide with their attackers. Bad cards in this matchup could include the Fall of Tracks, with my opponent having very few 4+ mana threats. So the Fall of Tracks would answer Ardors, of which there are 3. My opponent could choose to bring in Charlotte as a protected threat, but if my opponent is waiting until turn 5 to be able to play this and then also hold up mana to discard a card, I think I'm pretty happy. And then there's nothing else that my opponent can really bring in as a target for Fall of Tracks, so that seems like the obvious cut here. I could cut another one of them for a White Wing migration, but Fall of Tracks is generally going to make as many tokens as I would expect to get from White Wing migration, so I think keeping one of them in. Okay, hand with 3 lands, some interaction is looking pretty nice. One concern here is that I've only got 1 white source to be able to use for Banish to the Isle, but Gentle Grasp gives me some time to work with. Okay, opponent starts out with a Rage Cloak Shifter. This is nicer to hit with Let Them Eat Cake than their Emblazoned Hooligans, though I think keeping mana up to be able to counter their turn 2 play is probably better, given how easy it will be for me to weave Let Them In Cake into a later play. Alright, drawing another colorless source is not fantastic. Opponent doesn't have any utility lands that I would particularly like to use Time Ward Crags on, so that is mostly just a colorless land in this matchup. Okay, opponent thankfully does have a sorcery speed play this turn, so Gentle Grasp not fizzling to my opponent's instant speed plays. Okay, there is another white source. I don't want to banish to the Isle this turn. I am kind of inclined to keep Let Them Eat Cake for something better to hit than Rage Cloak Shifter. Though my opponent, most of my opponent's threats do pay them off for going wide, so I think it probably is worthwhile here to Let Them Eat Cake. Okay, opponent's Unburnt Maiden is a target for Banish to the Isle. Okay, drawing a Vengeful Whisper is a really nice curve topper. I think that means I want to lean into using Banish to the Isle, just to pad out the board a little bit before I can deploy a top end that's a bit better at interacting with my opponent than Keening Bell Tower. Having a look at my opponent's list, it doesn't look like they really have anything that can answer Vengeful Whisper. So I think as long as I just survive until I can get it out, that will help me a lot. So here I can play Banish to the Isle, leaving Steadfast Gatekeepers up so I can chip in for 2 against my opponent. There's nothing I can hold up for a single white mana, so I don't lose anything for attacking with Steadfast Gatekeepers. Okay, opponent thankfully doesn't have a either a 4th land or a 4-drop that they'd like to play. Opponent choosing Gamer as a creature type. Very nice. Alright, dropping this Vengeful Whisper here. Might seal it up. I suppose we'll see if my opponent gets a 4th land. Though, if my opponent draws into a Renowned Rough Rider, they could start stacking their board up, so it gets fairly scary. Vengeful Whisper not having Vigilance means I'm questioning a bit whether I should attack with it. Opponent has a very wide board at this point. Okay, so I can play Keening Bell Tower and try to just start putting pressure on my opponent. That would mean that I don't keep up mana for Gentle Grasp, though. I think it's quite likely that my opponent plays some sort of Anthem effect on the next turn to pay them off for all of these tokens. I think holding Vengeful Whisper back to block is not particularly helpful because all of my opponent's creatures are 1/1, so killing one of them doesn't seem as worthwhile as just trying to finish my opponent off. Since my opponent's at 13, if they don't gain any life, then I can finish them off with 3 attacks from Vengeful Whisper and then a single trigger from Keening Bell Tower. And I think that seems like my best course of action at this point. Yep, so that's what we're going to go for. Opponent also has the Dormant Crag, which is draining their life away as well. Okay, just going to drop the Ley Shard to give me some mana and a draw next turn. Okay, opponent does have an Anthem effect, so we're going to counter that. If my opponent does try to cast it again next turn, then that will end up triggering Keening Bell Tower if I decide to play it. Alright, opponent's swing for... Oop, that's the wrong number. 7 damage is not likely to outrace Vengeful Whisper. Opponent's gaining 1 life from their lifelink token, but I can match that with the Keening Bell Tower. Opponent only has 1 card in hand and a Love of the Lifetime coming next turn. In terms of legendary creatures that they can tutor with that, they wouldn't be able to play an Ardor. They do have Yeji as another option, though unless they draw a land, that's not something they'd be able to play either. And a Crux wouldn't particularly help them here. Okay, so here I'm going to deploy the Bell Tower, which will spell charge the Steadfast Gatekeepers. So it also means that Gatekeepers can tap for 2 mana to activate Keening Bell Tower. Okay, so second main phase, I can still play a land and tap the Ley Shard for mana if I draw into a Gentle Grasp. I could play the Lay Shard just to draw a card and drain another one now. In case my opponent does have a way of answering the Vengeful Whisper, doing this now would put my opponent to 4. My draw step would put them to 3. Cracking the second Lay Shard puts them to 2. Drawing another card off Bell Tower puts them to 1. So playing Lay Shard here doesn't help me win the game if my opponent has an answer for Vengeful Whisper. If my opponent plays Love of a Lifetime, they will have 12 damage on board. And I don't think there's anything they can do to get the extra 10 damage. So I think I'd rather hold Lay Shard for next turn, just in case I need it for some bigger play. Okay, opponent is casting Love of a Lifetime, so I draw a card off that. Opponent swinging in for 10 damage, holding back 1 blocker to chop the Steadfast Gatekeepers, but I think this is lethal. Looks like my opponent might be lagging a little bit. Right, so here I think I'm just going to deploy my cards just to spell charge Steadfast Gatekeepers. Alright, and that should be the final point of drain. Opponent doesn't have any instant speed life gain. Looks like they might have made a mistake somewhere, judging by their chat message. Okay, now that I'm on the draw, I don't think there's any changes that I make. Yeah, I think we're just running this one back. Okay, this hand looks pretty good. I have turn 1 interaction, a bunch of ramp, a counterspell, top end that gains me life. Am hoping to draw into some extra lands. Alright, another turn 1 Rage Cloak Shifter. I think being on the draw means I am going to hit that with a Let Them Eat Cake. Their 2 drops are a lot less threatening than their 3 and 4 drops, so saving Gentle Grasp for next turn I think is what I'm going to go for, rather than play the Lay Shard. Okay, opponent has a tap land here, which is a bit unfortunate for them mana-wise. That does make me think that they might have another untapped land in their hand that they're saving for next turn to be able to play a 3-drop, which makes me want to hold up the Gentle Grasp even more. And I do have the option of using Walk the Dead's Path if my opponent doesn't cast a spell pre-combat. Okay, looks like my opponent might be stuck for lands again, which is a bit unlucky for them. Does make my Gentle Grasp a bit better. That is not a land, though I can chain Gentle Grasp into each other and try and bang on those draws to try and get me to some more lands. And I think tapping out for the Lay Shard at this point is too dangerous. So I'm just hoping to draw into a 3rd land, so then I can play the Lay Shard after that. Opponent choosing to not use the exiled Ragtag Squad, but to instead play 1 from their hand, so I don't get the draw, but it means they are running out of gas a bit faster. Okay, interesting game with us both being stuck on 2 lands. I think it is still correct to not play the Lay Shard here. Okay, opponent going for a Raise Loop Meditation, so target for my 3rd Gentle Grasp. Not having played anything from the Exile Zone, so I'm not getting my card draw, but my opponent's also going down on cards. Alright, there's a Plains. That's what I wanted to see. So I think at this point I am playing the Lay Shard, because that lets me use Walk the Dead's Path if I need to, but if not, it means I have 4 mana on my next turn. Possibly 5 if I draw an untapped land. The opponent draws a 3rd land, but that one also enters tapped. Okay, so this is not something that Walk the Dead's Path is fantastic at answering. I could sacrifice the Lay Shard to remove this Rage Cloak Shifter to try and draw into lands faster, but it does mean that I give up the chance of having 5 mana next turn. So I think I just take this here. Save the Lay Shard for my next turn. Alright, there is that extra land, so we get to deploy the Vengeful Whisper here. Opponent can now resolve an Arda or an Anthem if they have one, and has 1 turn to be able to use that before I can interact. But I think the upside in this play far outweighs the downside of giving my opponent 1 free turn to do what they want. Opponent gets a token off the Unburnt Maiden. That is not something that I can handle super well with Walk the Dead's Path. That is another Vengeful Whisper though, which is really nice to see. This lets me keep back a lifelink blocker while I go to town on my opponent. Other option is to play Keening Bell Tower, which can spell charge the Steadfast Gatekeepers and then get an activation of it. But that gives my opponent the opportunity to swing back for a lot of damage. So the second Vengeful Whisper has to be it here. Imagine my opponent is probably not very happy to see that. And in fact, I do have lethal next turn if my opponent doesn't gain any life. Blazing Hooligan does mean my Vengeful Whisper can't block if they attack with at least 3 creatures. Okay, opponent has gotten to Solidarity, so that is Warrior, Human, Peasant, Soldier, Shapeshifter, Shaman. That is a bit scary. Alright, no blocks here. That is 15 damage, so opponent is actually very close with the Razor Leap Meditation. Okay, just double checking what my opponent could be holding up with 2 mana. At instant speed, Anointed Escort can't interact with me because those tokens don't have reach or flying. Opponent could have a Gentle Grasp, but they would need to use their Pain Land to be able to cast that, which would set them to 8, which is exactly for Vengeful Whisper. So I think we have managed to get there. The extra land draw means I can play Keening Bell Tower, keeping my 2 Steadfast Gatekeepers untapped as attackers. Seems like my opponent does have the Gentle Grasp here. Oh no, going for the food. I did actually miss the food, which is a bit awkward. So maybe I did need that land draw in order to secure the win here. Okay, opponent is chumping both of these, so that will set them to 3. Be able to draw off of the Keening Bell Tower. So, slightly awkwardly, I don't have access to any white mana at the moment. Though I could tap a Steadfast Gatekeeper for Ley Shard, then tap the other one and the Ley Shard to use Walk the Dead's Path on the Solidarity token. That would leave my opponent with 7 damage. And I'm only able to put my opponent to 1 life here if I use Keening Bell Tower and crack the Ley Shard. So opponent has 7 damage, I have a potential 15 life. Yeah, I believe that is the path forward here. Double checking that I have played a land this turn. Solidarity is always going to do more damage than Razor Leap Meditation, so there's no point targeting that with Walk the Dead's Path. And if my opponent does go for the, does use their Dormant Crag for mana, then Keening Bell Tower is immediately lethal. Opponent with the triple tap land and 1 pain land is a bit unfortunate for them. That is rough. Okay, it seems like the opponent might not have it. The opponent pumps 2 mana into the Shapeshifter, which gives them enough types for Solidarity, but not enough for lethal. Yeah, they are needing to tap the Dormant Crag, so that means Keening Bell Tower is lethal. So, good game to Acolyte. That was quite a bit closer than I would have liked, given Acolyte's kind of deck is pretty much exactly what my deck is aiming at countering. That could mean that this deck doesn't have enough sweepers. Possible that running additional copies of Shengfa is ideal, just given how good of a top end that is in this matchup. Vengeful Whisper not having Vigilance actually made it a fair bit worse as a top end threat capable of locking out the game in this matchup than I would have liked. Still obviously quite good, probably better than most other top end options just by nature of having lifelink, but that is a weakness to note there. The other point that I can think of in this matchup is that just a cheaper sweeper effect like Fall of O'Lantern would help here, obviously, but the quadruple white mana cost would mean that I need to adjust my mana base, removing some of the colorless options. Potentially all of them if I want to more consistently be able to cast that on turn 4. It's definitely an option, but I think the fact that my deck is somewhat token based in terms of its win cons means that that would be spreading my resources too thinly. I think that's all that I have to wrap up about this matchup. Thanks to Acolyte for the game, and we will see you in future rounds. Bye bye.